Kevin Lawton is the host of the New Warehouse podcast, and boy, does he have a story for you. I mean, Kevin started what essentially a hobby podcast in the warehouse space, and he turned it into a six-figure startup business, and he is just getting started. I mean, just getting started. Kevin, thanks for joining me today. I am so looking forward to hearing everybody hear your story.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Chuck. And it's interesting to be on the other side of the mic from you because usually you're a guest on my podcast. This is nice.
Yeah, we did it today, in fact. A little fun, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah. A little safety tip from Chuck. That was good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today. Let's get right into it. So, you
Sure.
had this crazy idea. This was,
hmm
I mean, how long ago did you start your podcast?
So I started the podcast in 2019.
And how many episodes do you think you have now?
I think I'm at 340 something.
340 episodes in
Yeah, somewhere around
essentially
there.
3+ years. So, what were you thinking that led you to say, you know what, I'm going to give this podcast thing a go? I mean, what got that started?
Honestly, I wasn't thinking about it. No, initially I was never had any intention to go into warehousing industry, supply chain, anything of that nature. Um, and I didn't go to school for that, anything like that. I went to school for entrepreneurial studies, actually, which I guess kind of worked out later on.
Yeah.
But no, I ended up in the warehousing industry, and at some point, I decided in my career that I should embrace the industry a little bit and try and learn some more about the industry. And that kind of led me to trying to figure out how do I learn more about this industry. And in the past, and still somewhat, not as heavily, I was very much into sneakers actually when I was like in high school, college, and
I didn't
this
see
was
this
like
coming.
this was like 2004 to 10 ish, I guess.
hmm
And I was really for sneakers my way of getting information, new releases about limited editions and exclusive releases, all this stuff, where to get them. Um, that was all coming from blogs. So
hmm
my first thought on how to learn about some kind of topic was to try and find some blogs. So I was looking for blogs about the warehousing industry, what's going on with the warehousing industry, and really what I found was there was not much.
hmm
There was some things that were out there, but they were kind of like taking, and bear in mind at the time I was probably like in my late 20s, right? So I was still
hmm
kind of young. And uh, what I found was like it just these old kind of like trade magazines
Yep.
just regurgitated on a website,
hmm
basically,
Yep.
which to me at the time was like, oh, this is so dry.
hmm
I don't want to sit down and read this. This is
hmm
not really exciting or anything like that. And I had a friend who was working as a social media coordinator for a blog called the Auto Blog, and
hmm
they were doing like videos of cars and things like that. And kind of thought to myself, like, why can't there be something like this for warehousing? Like,
hmm
why can't there be something that kind of shines on the technology? And
hmm
because at the time I was not totally familiar with all the robotics and automation. I mean, I had
hmm
seen some in the operations I've worked in, and it was kind of like, why can't we highlight something like this and
Sure.
make it sexy in a
Yep.
sense? So my initial thought was like, well, I know blogging, so let me do a blog maybe.
hmm
And I had done some blog writing, ghost writing for real estate market.
hmm
Um, and then at the time I was in the process of like a project, brand new warehouse, putting in ASRS system, voice picking, all this stuff. And
hmm
hours were just crazy. And it was just like, you know what? I don't know about this blog thing because
Yeah.
I have like no time to
hmm
like write, then reread it, then edit it, figure out how to distribute it, and all this stuff. And I had been talking about the idea with my boss at the time. Actually, we were kind of throwing around these ideas, and he was the one actually that told me, "Why don't you do a podcast?" And at
There it
that
is.
point, to be honest, like podcasts were around. I had heard of them. I had never listened to a podcast
Hmm.
ever in
Hmm.
my life at that point. Um, and so I thought about it and I was like, like this is pretty interesting because basically I can sit down
Hmm.
and I could just say what I was thinking instead of having to write it, then reread it, all this stuff. And and the podcast has like a bit of a raw element, I guess, to
Hmm.
it. So you don't have to worry too much about editing or anything
Right.
like that.
Yep.
And that's really kind of how that came about. That's really how it kind of came to fruition. I finally, this was probably like had been floating around in my head 2017, 2018, I
Hmm.
think. And then 2019, I guess I finally, I guess they say, put pen to paper. I guess I put voice to mic, I
Hmm.
guess in this sense, right? You could say. Yeah. And that's really how it kind of started out.
Well, there's a lot of cool stuff here for entrepreneurs out there
Mm,
that, first of all, what's changed in a number of years is how people go and learn about things. It used to be, I mean, I'm a lot older than you are. Okay. But when
mhm,
it used to be, in the Stone Ages, when we used to chisel them out on a stone, but the only way that people could learn about products and things were, they could read the books. Okay. They could read the trade magazines, they could see ads, or the salesman would come and bring them new stuff. And it was all written. And then the internet evolves and things come along and technology advances. And all of a sudden, people started using other ways and other types of media to start to consume the education. I mean, that's really what happened
yeah.
is nowadays the primary mode for consumption of education materials, it's the internet. It makes it harder for salespeople, but it's the internet. In the
Mhm.
case of podcasts, they listen. In the case of video, they're watching and listening. They're still consumption by reading and writing and blogs and that kind of thing. But that's our primary education source now. So you jumped in, you didn't invent the podcast, but you kind of got on a wave early on and said, okay, we're going to
Mhm.
make the shift from written materials to internet materials, if you will. And that made you an early adopter. And now 340 episodes later. How many
Yeah.
podcasts did you record today?
I did 4 earlier today. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kevin, on his day off, okay, recorded 4 podcasts. Okay. So clearly he's committed or should be. Ain't no doubt. So, so what was the hard part? What did you struggle with getting started?
Sure. I mean, I think, and to backtrack a little bit to your point, people are digesting information in different ways now, and I think when I look back and I think about my mindset and perspective at that point, like I had done an undergraduate degree and then I had done a graduate degree, and at that point, I was not really like I want to sit down and really do like another education type of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for something more interesting to consume information, which I think is a huge thing now, right? Not feeling so classroom or studious, like I guess maybe listening to a podcast is a
Yeah.
little different.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I started, the challenge was, well, for one, the challenge was I had no idea how to do a podcast. I like my familiarity with podcasts was like I guess it's like a radio show, right?
Yeah.
And I had previously done a radio show actually. Um at my alma mater, Rider University, I did a radio show about real estate. But I would come in 1 hour a week to the radio station. I would talk into the microphone about whatever I was going to talk about, and there was a student producer and they did everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I never learned like any of the background stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started to do it, yeah, I mean, I got my microphone, and then I think the big challenge was figuring out the distribution
Mm-hmm.
aspect.
Yeah.
How do I get this into like an Apple podcast or Spotify or something like that? And I want to say actually when I started, I don't think Spotify was that big on podcast yet.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the big challenge. So I knew, so I got myself a microphone, and then I was trying to figure out how do I use that. And I was doing that, playing around with it, and then I kind of quickly realized that um, recording stuff, and I wanted to have guests because my ultimate goal in the beginning with the podcast was like it was one to learn more about the industry and just do that by talking to other people in the industry, and the podcast was like an excuse to talk to people, right?
Hmm.
And then the end goal was kind of like I'm going to go into consulting for warehousing, so this
Hmm.
is like a way to get my name out there somehow, like
Sure.
create a little brand. So uh but then as I was doing that, playing around, and started to interview like one or two people. I kind of quickly realized that like, hey, recording this in my house, and I had, I guess my son was 2019. I guess he was like around 4 or 5 at that point when I started, and he's running around. I'm in the basement, and his footsteps are getting caught on the microphone and stuff, and I quickly realized like I need to find a space where I can record that's quiet if I'm gonna like kind of do this thing. So I found a local co-working space, and it just so happened that when I did that, the manager, and when I signed up and stuff, told me like, oh, there's another guy here that uses the space, and he also does podcasting. You should connect with him. So
Cool.
I said, oh, okay, yeah, let me talk to him. So I ended up meeting this guy, and he actually had his own. He had been podcasting for like many years already,
Hmm.
and at 2019, I mean, podcasting for many years is a pretty early adopter, right?
Hmm.
And he actually had built out his own like podcast directory and services business at this point, which even then is like pretty early to be doing something like that.
Hmm.
So he really helped me and guided me through all the process to set up and get the RSS feed going, and all those different types of things. And he helped me create the intro to the podcast too. And I remember we were trying to get the forklift sound for the beginning of the intro. I was like trying to record forklift sounds at my day job on my phone to try and put in the intro. And then he finally found a clip somewhere to make it happen. But yeah, so that was the biggest challenge in the beginning, and then I would say the next biggest challenge was finding people to be on the podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
um the first guest was actually, and at the time, being someone that was not super familiar with
Hmm.
the warehousing industry, right, and going into this, wanting to learn more and get more connected. I was trying to think like what would be a very interesting first episode, like something about robots, I guess, right? Like robots are cool. That's interesting. People want to hear about those. So I just kind of used LinkedIn, looked around a little bit, robots, like who knows about robots, and I found this guy, Bruce Welty, who actually was one of the co-founders of Locus Robotics, which
Hmm.
is now like one of the biggest robotics companies out there.
Yep.
And at the time, I didn't really realize like, hey, this is like a pretty big get for the industry for a guest. Like, I didn't even know until probably like a couple months later when I started getting more involved in the industry, like realizing like, oh, that was like a pretty big guest.
Hmm.
And he was he was very nice about it. I just sent him a cold message on LinkedIn basically, and he just agreed to do it, like no problem. And we had a great chat, and then the challenge like beyond that was like, oh, how do I keep getting guests? Like, how do
Yep.
I keep getting guests in? And so like I had done like I think my second episode was with my boss at the time, who was
Hmm.
the one who suggested the podcast actually, and I think I did one with my mom who's in like HR, talking about some HR stuff in the warehouse.
Hmm.
And then when I got that challenge, and then I tried to figure out like, oh man, like how am I going to get more guests? Like how am I going to do this? And how am I going to keep consistency, right? Because I kept reading like, oh, podcasting, like consistency, right? So I was trying to release one episode a week every Monday.
Hmm.
Um, And somewhere along the line, I think I started the podcast in, I want to say February or March.
Hmm.
And somewhere in my networking, messaging attempts to get guests, yeah, someone just casually kind of mentioned like, "Oh, are you gonna go to Promat?"
Mm.
And I'm like, "Promat? Like, what is that? What, should I like go to Promat? Like, what?" And
No
then,
big deal. Tiny little thing.
and trying to, be like, I got something going on here. I was just responding to him. I think like, "Oh, I'm not quite sure yet, right?" And then, get off the call or the message or whatever, and like quickly Google like Promat. What is Promat? And so I looked it up, and I'm like, oh man, like this is like where I should be, right? Like this is the
Hmm.
thing. And I remember it was like a month away. So I'm like, how do I get there? Like, I mean, it's in Chicago. I'm in New Jersey. Like, should I do this? Like, should I go for this and go out there? So looking around on the website, right, and I see like, oh, they have press requests
Hmm.
for passes, and I'm
Yep.
like, well, I guess like maybe I'm technically press now, maybe, right?
Maybe.
So I fill out the form and see what happens, and yeah, they email me back like, okay, like here's your press pass, like you're good, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going. So
That's a whole new world of possibilities at a trade show.
yeah, right. So I did that, and the next thing I knew, like I guess by doing that, I got put on some press list or something.
Hmm.
Um, my inbox exploded with guest requests at the
Wow.
show. And so that solved that challenge,
Hmm.
like right off the bat of getting guests. And I will say, since that Promat
Hmm.
and getting on that press thing, this is like 2019, right? To this day, I will say that it's like super rare, 340 some episodes, that I'm like reaching out to people and asking them to be a guest. It's just constant inbound,
Hmm.
do you want us on? Can we get on the show? So those were the probably the two biggest challenges I think in the beginning, and
Hmm.
that's kind of how I tackled them. Yeah.
Well, again, I'm coming back to, for the entrepreneurs out there, that's really the model. So
Hmm.
it used to be that the only way you got that new business, is you had to go out there and you had to knock on doors and make all those phone calls and chase, 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 chase. And what did you really want all along? You really wanted people to come to you as enthusiastic hand raisers so that you can spend your time doing what you do best, right? And
Yeah.
that's making stuff or recording a podcast or becoming a warehouse expert, an entrepreneur.
Mm.
That's really your model out there. And you didn't even do it on purpose, but you found this amazing formula that
Yeah.
is the recipe for success. That
Yeah.
is the recipe. If you want to create demand, that's how you do it. It takes luck. But it takes
Yeah.
perseverance. It takes a little confusion, and sometimes putting your mom on the podcast. Mental note: ask Anita to
Yes.
join the podcast, and and then the next thing you know, you've created demand, and you have those enthusiastic hand raisers coming in. That's the story, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it was, and it was pretty overwhelming. I will say if I didn't do that ProMat thing and kind of just like take the risk of,
Mm-hmm.
and I think prior to starting the podcast, I had learned in some different ways, to just always ask, and if the answer is no, the answer is no, move on, right?
Yep.
But so if I had never tried to get that press pass or
Mm-hmm.
anything, like I would say I probably wouldn't be here
Mm-hmm.
talking to you right now
Yeah. Right.
about this podcast, because at some point I think I would have kind of like ran around in circles trying to figure out guest and what's next,
Mm-hmm.
and at some point just said like, giving up on the podcast, but now I'm here, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we wouldn't be friends in the
Yeah.
warehouse technology business. That's how we met, through
Hmm.
networking. And the next thing you know, here we are, and we've met in person, not just LinkedIn. Go figure.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and sponsored your podcast in the past and the whole nine yards. I
Oh,
mean, we
yeah.
wouldn't even know each other probably.
Mhm.
So, so I'm sure you had some doubts along the way. So you've got the people coming in, they're
Sure.
asking you to be on the podcast, but still, you're still in the infancy,
Mhm.
and so what were your kind of first positive signals aside from the guest that says, you know what,
Mhm.
this has got legs? I mean, I can keep saying yes to these people and bringing them in. There's something that's
Yeah.
working here. What was working?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, it all kinds of, I mean, I would say like the foundation was really built at that first ProMat
Okay.
2019, right? And it was one thing to get all the guests coming in. And then, and I'll say, for anybody that's looking to, start a business, whatever, like, I didn't, just go to ProMat and just kind of hang out. Like I
Mm-hmm.
went there 3 days. I bought a handheld recorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Microphone recorder. And for 3 days, I was on foot, like booth to booth to booth to booth. I think I did 45 interviews in 3 days
I love it.
for the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I was, flying through there. Another thing I did was I hired two people off Craigslist, put a
Mm-hmm.
Craigslist ad in Chicago and said like I needed brand ambassadors or something for a trade show. And I found these two young girls, students that I guess worked trade shows and things and booths and stuff. And I told them like I need you to do something a little different. Like I got these like a stack of cards printed. I'm like, you're gonna take these cards and you're just gonna go to every booth, tell them about the new warehouse. I had some like shirts made really quickly. I'm like, throw these shirts on, go tell them about the new warehouse. And then because I knew that like, hey, I'm gonna go and knock out a ton of audio content,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not gonna have time to like do pictures,
Yep.
Instagram, any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Here's like the login to my Instagram, and the two of you go and just like take over the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that. They did an amazing job, I'll say. And so shout out to them wherever they are at this point. But
I think you need to
and
get them
then
on a podcast and interview them.
see if they remember. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
right.
And actually, I'll be at ProMat this year. I was thinking about trying to reach out back to them and reconnect with them. But so yeah, and then from there, I think after ProMat was really like where I started to see some traction, and that was really kind of like the positive signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, I started releasing the episodes or the interviews that I had recorded, and then it was like the companies were, posting them on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn or mentioning me on LinkedIn and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, like they're seeing like some value in
Mm-hmm.
these conversations. And then even like post show, then like the guest requests like kept coming
Mm-hmm.
inbound, and I was like, man, like this is really good. And then I was still working full time at the time, and I had a kid and all this stuff. And so I was doing podcasts like, late at night. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like, after bedtime for my son, like, I was going, trying to edit, put the podcast together, get it out, get it done, up until like 1 o'clock in the morning, things like that. And then, back in work at 8 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So I was grinding it out. But the, then, um, yeah, I think there was just a point somewhere, I want to say maybe like 6 months in or something like that, where and I hadn't really thought about this yet, even because I just didn't think that I was at that point yet. But like conversations started to come up about advertising or
Yep.
sponsoring on the
Yep. Yep.
podcast, right? And that was when I think I was like, maybe this is potentially more
Mm-hmm.
than what I initially thought it could be or
Mm-hmm.
lead to.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was trying to use it as a means to another business, which would be consulting, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then, but I never went into it thinking like the podcast could be the business.
Of course.
Um, so when that happened, and I'll say, the sponsor was, a big company. It was Zebra
Mm-hmm.
Technologies, was the first sponsor of the podcast, and they were like all in on it, kind of, and they invited me up to headquarters, and we did some stuff there in Long Island, and all those kinds of things, and that was really kind of like when it started my brain really moving in a different direction of like, how else can we expand on this? What can we do? There's some money coming in. How do we use that money to
Mm-hmm.
grow? And that was really like the start of some of those positive signs. I think was the question,
Mm-hmm.
of like, okay, like this is something, and this could really be something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So did it ever, I mean, you're this growth journey, right? You've got a day job, you've got a
Mhm.
side hustle essentially now.
Yeah.
Okay. You're staying up till 1 in the morning. You mentioned your son a couple of times now. So
Yeah.
is there some point where, it kind of gets out of control and you feel overwhelmed? I mean, did you ever come across that?
Uh, yeah, I would say definitely. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily because of the podcast. It was because of the day job, right?
Mm.
It was like I was enjoying the podcast more,
Mm-hmm.
and the day job, like I mentioned earlier when we were in the discussion, I was doing this new startup,
Mm-hmm.
new warehouse startup,
Yep.
I guess, to play on the name of my podcast there. But putting out this new tech and stuff, and it was the project was changing a lot, and there was a lot of it that was out of my control,
Mm-hmm.
and it was becoming very stressful and not the right environment. I mean, there were some days where, we're running a 3 shift operation. There's some days I'm coming in, 8 o'clock in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
staying till 6, go home, eat dinner, say goodnight to my son, go
Mm-hmm.
back to be with third shifts, till midnight, then be back at 8 o'clock in the morning again. And
Yep.
and there was a point, I think, where it was like, this is like too much. And,
Mm-hmm.
it was, do I want to give up the extracurricular things for the full-time job, or is this full-time job like just not the right thing right now for me?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately the decision was the full-time job. I ended up letting that go,
Mm-hmm.
with nothing else really lined up, because I just had like reached that point of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and then I kind of like had a month of trying to figure some things out. I had been working, I mean, I had also been working part time in real estate too, as a real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to figure that out, see if maybe that was the route to go now. But still doing the podcast. And yeah, and then I kind of found another job in warehousing distribution, and that was more reasonable, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. And yeah, I mean, that was the point, I think, really, where it was like that. And then, from time to time, like, there's certain projects going on where it was kind of like I was like scrambling, like, well, I got to get a podcast out. Like, what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there were certainly times where it was like, oh, like, I have a podcast episode every Monday in the beginning was
Mm-hmm.
the start. And it was like, oh, it's Saturday, and I haven't recorded a podcast for this upcoming week. And it's Saturday. I can't really get a guest in one day. What am I gonna do? So I would, think and think and think, and then, it would probably be like 11 p.m. Sunday night. I would just like sit down and like hammer something out like on my own as
Mm-hmm.
a podcast show. Which there's only, I would say there's only maybe 3 or 4 episodes out of 340 that are just me solo.
Mm-hmm.
But
And I've heard
yeah,
them,
I
by the
mean,
way.
yeah, yeah. Actually,
You hammered it out, man.
one of them is the most listened to episode, I will say. Not trying to toot my own horn here, but just an interesting fact.
Yeah.
But and surprising to me, actually. But yeah, so those were definitely times where it was like, challenging, and trying to figure out, like, does something need to be subtracted here, and
Hmm.
what is it?
Yeah.
And really that led me to figure out, how do I start having some people like help me with this thing,
Hmm.
because it is like, getting to be a lot. And I brought in a student intern, who we were able to figure out he could get some credit for the semester, for helping me out doing editing and stuff like that. And then he actually came to Modex with me and did the production for me there and all that stuff. When we had first time we had a booth at the trade show, we did
Hmm.
podcast there. And then actually, yeah, actually he still works for me to this day. Shout out to Eric. Thank you, Eric, for everything.
It's a good dude.
Um, yeah, yeah.
I
So he
met him
still
down at
does
Modex with
the
you. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. So yeah, yeah, he does all the setup of the episodes and
Hmm.
everything. So yeah, so that's really how I kind of had some challenges and then started to overcome them a bit. Yeah.
So then it all changed. I mean, more opportunity arose. I mean, so
Yeah.
you left that day job behind. What other
Yes.
opportunities arose for you?
Sure. So, I mean, I think even just through that, obviously there was more sponsors that came or
Hmm.
advertisers for the podcast, and podcast started generating more revenue and becoming a business on itself. And then I started to position myself as, I guess, as someone in warehousing
Hmm.
expertise, so to
Hmm.
speak, in quotes there. But so it led me to start to think about, how do I do this kind of thing full time, or what would that look like, and what other things could I do to create additional revenue streams. One of the things I did probably earlier, more so than later, was like I decided like, oh, okay, I started figuring out how do I batch record episodes, right? Like you mentioned, I did 4 today, right? So I was doing like I would have 1 or 2 days a week where like after work, I would leave work at like 4:15 or something like that, and I would like hit the chair at like 4:50, and boom, 5 o'clock, like podcast recording, 6 o'clock podcast recording, break, dinner, 8 o'clock podcast recording, right?
Hmm.
So I was like very trying to heavily load up on content, making sure that there were no gaps in the consistency. Um, and which now that I'm, full time entrepreneur or whatever, have flexibility in my time. Like I will do, 1 or 2 days a month, and I'll do anywhere from 4 to maybe 6, 7, 8 podcast recordings in a day.
Hmm.
Um, and then I'm good for a while, and I can
Hmm.
focus on all the other parts of the business, right?
Hmm.
But the other opportunities that came were, I mentioned the advertising sponsors, but then I also got the opportunity to become an adjunct professor at
Hmm.
my alma mater. I started to network more. Got involved in ASCM, my local chapter here in Jersey. I'm on the board for them. Actually, I'm the executive VP right now, and I will be president next term.
And for those that
Board.
don't know, ASCM is,
Oh, Association of Supply Chain Management.
there you go, in South
Yep.
Jersey.
Yeah.
Center of your universe, man.
Yep. And then yeah, and then from the podcast back, I want to say it was back in 2019. I think late in 2019. I had a guest on the show, and we stayed in touch ever since then. And this past year, or actually late 2021, he has a company. I don't think I can say all the details because we still kind of have like NDA a little bit.
Hmm.
But he has a company, and they do like fulfillment services for e-commerce brands, and
Hmm.
they focus on micro fulfillment centers
Hmm.
in like densely populated areas. So I had gone up to see this micro fulfillment center in Manhattan, and do a podcast recording with him. And I just kind of like, as we mentioned, you ever want to open a spot in Philly, let me know. And then fast forward late 2021, we had remained in touch,
Hmm.
and we talked, and yeah, and he said he thinks he's ready for Philly, and so that led to us doing a deal and a partnership, where I was able to leverage the podcast into opening a fulfillment business, 3PL services, and I'm running all the fulfillment operation in Philadelphia, within that micro fulfillment center. And that's all under the New Warehouse brand. So the New Warehouse actually has a warehouse now,
Nice.
which has always kind of been a little bit of a goal.
Hmm.
And I think, long term, even looking at that, we're looking at being able to have a place where we can like demo products and show those products through our channel and stuff
Hmm.
like that. So that was certainly a big opportunity, I would say, which was like the push that really allowed me to let go of the 9 to 5 working
Hmm.
for somebody else and now kind of really on my own. And then within the last year as well, I think it's interesting because you let go of the 9 to 5 and you end up having so much more brain capacity.
Yep.
I think
Sure.
to think about your business, right?
Hmm.
So as we're doing this, and I'm able to have more conversations, more networking with people, um, and there's certainly kind of recognizing there's a bit of a gap in the warehousing industry for like content creation
Hmm.
for companies.
Hmm.
So we've also now started to kind of like softly, I guess, at this point, offer some content creation services. We have one client that we just kind of did an agreement with in December, and we'll be creating like some white label kind of content for them, and then also some collaborative content through the New Warehouse too. And that's something that we're going to be rolling out more this year.
Hmm.
We'll be doing like video services and written services, white papers, blog posts, news articles, all those different types of things. And I think the unique thing about the new warehouse and the team that I'm kind of building around that is that we all have some type of warehousing or supply chain background, right?
Hmm.
And I think remaining in that kind of niche is really been the key
Hmm.
for me, I would say.
Hmm.
Because even if you look at the podcast, the niche is like warehousing, right?
Right.
Whereas there's some broader supply chain podcasts and things like that. But from a business perspective, it makes a ton of sense because even though I'm not going to have the amount of downloads that like a Joe Rogan has or something
Hmm.
like that on a
What?
podcast. We're looking at something that's like from a marketer's perspective is very targeted
Yes.
audience already because of the
Hmm.
subject matter. So from like an advertising sponsorship,
Hmm.
you don't necessarily fit into the traditional model, I think, for podcasting because you have more of that premium thing. Whereas, if I'm gonna advertise on like a regular like just general comedy podcast,
Right.
I don't know how many people I'm gonna reach that are
Hmm.
in the warehousing industry, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so those are definitely some of the opportunities, and yeah, we just launched our new video series today as well, in January, and um, called All Hands, and that kind of stems from an all hands meeting that you would have in your warehouse where everybody
Hmm.
kind of comes to the floor and gets the dish, I guess, on whatever's going on. And Chuck was kind enough to lend a safety tip for the first one, so I appreciate that.
Well, that's
But
what friends do, right?
yeah, but those are some of the opportunities, and we're certainly looking to expand on the 3PL services this year further as
Hmm.
well, trying to find a additional bigger space and potentially some transportation things
Hmm.
as well. Yeah,
Wow.
so
Well,
lots of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's the concept of staying in your niche
Mhm.
it's also crucial that,
Oh yeah.
there's a saying that the riches are in the niches. There's a
Yes.
saying that, niche down until it hurts, then niche down again.
Mm.
You were already there. The rest
Yeah.
of us, they say, okay, well, we've got to go wider. We want to be all things to all people. And we find that,
Mhm.
you become jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
And there's so many good aspects to your story. And you started out with entrepreneurial studies in
Yeah.
college, so I'm not going to say you didn't know. You may have known some of this stuff, and it kind of just gave you that foundation to build. But
Mhm.
again, there's so much takeaway from your story that any entrepreneurial business, any small medium business can learn from the targeting, the niche, to the building content up and being able to save it up and parse it out later,
Mhm.
to uh, the new mode of learning for people, to
Yeah.
all these different things that people can learn from. And again, that's why I wanted to bring you on to tell this story. So so you've pretty much told us the future. You still have more in the, I mean, Lord, no, you still have more up your sleeve, Kevin. How many businesses are you going to run?
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's all, one business. It's all the new warehouse. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly, I think the one thing that I've always tried to do is keep an open mind to the opportunities that are there.
Hmm.
So, even in some cases, like just talking to the podcast guests and seeing what are they seeing in the market, or
Hmm.
what's maybe needed in the market, and thinking about and evaluating like what makes sense for me to potentially go into is always there. So I think right now, now that I've and I will say that letting go of the 9 to 5 corporate job is something it was like long overdue for me,
Hmm.
right? And so now that I've done that, and I'm 35 now, I'm like, I will have this like 5-year timeline, like when I hit 40, right? Then I'm like, these 5 years, like I'm just gonna like, you know, take advantage of all this time that I've been like storing up in my head, like,
Yep.
that I'm gonna do like when I'm gonna be on my own, and I'm just gonna like, hit it. Um and yeah, and there's gonna be, some different avenues for the new warehouse, and then, maybe some potential other stuff as well. I mean, I would love to get into advising some other companies and investing and things like that as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Well, either way, you have a long road ahead of you, and lots of
Yeah.
opportunity that you have frankly created all from thin air, thanks to the advice of your boss. And it sounds
Yeah.
like a couple of interns. Holy mackerel! I mean, but
Yeah.
all along it took that, like I said, little luck, lots of hard work, lots of sweat, and
Yeah.
you know,
Little sleep. Yeah.
and very little sleep, very little sleep.
I will say that. Yeah. Yeah. I think I always say that job that I was talking about where I burned out and I just left. I would say the one thing about that job is that I learned how far I could push myself on very little sleep.
Hmm.
So I know like when I have to get something done or have to push for something, whether it's project prepping for an event or something like that, like I know how much gas I got left in the tank and how far I can go, and when I need to like
Yep.
cut it and take that rest and then jump back on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that I and the rest of the audience are a little ticked off that you don't have more gray hairs from all this journey. I mean, so come back and talk to us again when your beard
Yeah.
looks like this, friend. I mean, come
Sure. Yeah. 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 If I could grow a full beard, yeah, I can't really,
on.
but but yeah,
uh,
yeah, sure.
uh,
I have more war stories then, I guess.
well, do you have any advice for the budding entrepreneur? Anything you want to share? Words of wisdom?
Sure. Yeah, so I will go at it from two perspectives. One, from the perspective of a student, which I do tell my students this, that when you are in school, and I wish that I thought this way, or knew, or not knew, but I wish I thought this way when I was in school, that when you are at a college or a university, you have almost unlimited resources around you to try and build up a business
Mm,
and build a brand in a way. You have
right.
students, peers that are graphic designers, work for the radio station, video production, PR majors, whatever the case may be, business majors all over the place, right? So they want to build something, and make a name for themselves too. And,
Hmm.
so they should be willing to, grind it out with you. So you need to take advantage of that while you have it, because once you're out of there, the resources are not that free anymore,
Yep.
right? And not as easily accessible or available either. So that's my advice for a student that maybe wants to start something. For somebody else that wants to start something later in their career, my advice would be, I always took the mindset because I knew at some point I wanted to be an entrepreneur, right?
Hmm.
And I went to school for that. I just wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be when I graduated. So that's how I kind of ended up in warehousing, actually. But I always treated my job with the mindset of like an entrepreneur, and
Hmm.
I
Yep.
always acted as in my role that I was running like my own little business within the business, whether I was, on my own as just, a entry level employee, or I was a manager supervisor. Like my team was like, okay, we're a business and we are servicing the other departments
Yep.
of this company, so we're going to act like that. Um, and I think that's one way to look at it, because you're always going to be having to, even, if you try and pick the most low touch business or something like that, you're going to have to interact with people at some point, and you
Hmm.
want to be able to do that and always have that mindset towards it.
Hmm.
And you want to also learn as much from the businesses that you work for too. So
Hmm.
I always constantly, and I think I would drive some people nuts, honestly, but I would always constantly be asking why, right? Even though like my job is in, the warehousing department, distribution, I'm under that umbrella. I still want to know, why does this transaction have this impact on finance, right?
Hmm.
Or why does the system do this? And I think, honestly, I probably drove IT the most crazy, because I would just constantly ask, why can't we do this with the system? Why can't we do that? But through that constantly curious mindset, you're gonna learn more about the business, how businesses operate, whether good or bad. And you learn, the good things, and certainly you learn the bad things too, not to take with you. And so that can really kind of help to build the foundation of how you're gonna build your business out from an infrastructure perspective, and
Hmm.
how you're gonna plan for the long term. Yeah.
So my takeaway is be a toddler and ask why all the time and drive IT
Yes.
crazy. There's,
Yeah.
there's a two great ways to go through life.
Yeah.
I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, my friend, this is a fascinating story. I
Hmm.
cannot thank you enough for your time. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for your friendship. It's been a pleasure to watch it grow over the past over 2 years now,
Yeah.
and I am just just in awe, truly in awe of what you've been able to create. And so, folks, my name is Chuck Coxhead. This is my host Kevin Lawton, or my host. Yeah, he's my host.
Oh.
My guest, Kevin Lawton from the New Warehouse, not just podcast, the New Warehouse, and so much more.
Hmm.
I highly recommend you reach out, connect to Kevin. If you're in anything related to the warehouse business, trust me, the water's warm. There's room for all. You'll definitely want to speak with him. Heck, maybe you'll end up a guest on the New Warehouse podcast and working with Kevin in some other way. Everything else you need to know is going to be in the show notes. And I'm so grateful for your time and listening in on this great story.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks. Good night, Kevin.